My name is Camille. I am 32 years old, and the night they left me on the cold pavement, unable to stand, I understood something that would take years to accept. Love can break bones just as easily as hatred. I remember the sound before the pain. A dull crack inside my body, followed by a silence so loud it swallowed my scream. I was lying there, staring at the sky, my breath coming out in short, useless gasps, while voices argued above me about what I had done, about how I had ruined everything. None of them asked if I could move. None of them touched my hand. Someone said my name, but not with concern. It was said like a verdict. I tried to stand. My legs did not answer. Panic flooded me faster than the pain, and I felt something collapse inside my chest that never fully healed. I begged them to help me. I begged like a child who still believed love was unconditional. They walked away. The hospital lights were too bright for someone who had just lost her life. Doctors spoke softly, nurses avoided my eyes, and the word permanent hovered in the air like a curse nobody wanted to pronounce out loud. I stared at my legs under the white sheets and waited for them to wake up. They never did. In the days that followed, the truth was rewritten without me. Stories were told, accusations repeated, lies polished until they sounded reasonable. I listened from my bed as people explained my own life to strangers. I was no longer Camille. I was a problem that had finally been solved. William did not come that first week. I told myself it was because he didn't know. Then I told myself it was because he was afraid. Eventually, I stopped telling myself anything at all. When he finally appeared, he stood in the doorway like someone visiting a grave too late. He didn't cry. He didn't touch me. He just looked at my legs, then at my face as if trying to decide which one scared him more. I didn't believe them at first, he said quietly. That sentence hurt more than the diagnosis. I wanted to ask him what changed his mind. I wanted to ask how long it took for love to become doubt, and doubt to become abandonment. But my mouth refused to cooperate. All I could do was watch him leave, this time slowly, carefully, as if he wanted credit for not running. Rehabilitation was a language I had to learn from scratch. Pain had new meanings. Time moved differently. Days were measured in inches, in trembling muscles, in humiliation disguised as progress. I learned how to smile when people told me I was so strong, even when I felt hollow. Letters stopped coming. Calls faded into memory. My world shrank to a room, a routine, and a future that no longer resembled anything I had planned. At night, when the building fell silent, I replayed everything. The arguments, the accusations, the moment my body hit the ground. I wondered how many lies it takes to justify leaving someone behind. I wondered how many people have to agree before abandonment becomes acceptable. What hurt most wasn't losing the ability to walk. It was realizing how easily I had been erased. I disappeared quietly after that. No farewell, no explanation. I let them believe whatever made it easier to sleep. Somewhere between physical therapy sessions and sleepless nights, something inside me hardened. Not into hatred, into resolve. I promised myself that if I ever stood again, in any way that mattered, I would not do it for them. I would do it because surviving was no longer enough. And while they thought my story had ended on that pavement, mine was only beginning to learn how to breathe again. They moved me to a smaller facility on the edge of the city, the kind of place people choose when they want to forget someone exists. The walls were clean but tired, like the people inside them. I learned the sound of my wheelchair on the floor better than I ever knew the sound of my own footsteps. Every push forward reminded me of what had been taken, and every stop reminded me of who had taken it. The mirror became my enemy. I avoided it at first, then I studied it like evidence. My face looked the same, but my eyes didn't belong to the woman I used to be. They were older, quieter, as if they had learned secrets too heavy to speak out loud. I practiced smiling until it felt convincing enough to fool strangers, but never myself. People came and went. Therapists rotated. Encouraging voices changed faces. Promises sounded identical no matter who said them. It will take time. You're making progress. Don't give up. They meant well, but none of them knew what it felt like to be abandoned by the people who once swore they would never let go of you. One afternoon, a woman sat beside me in the common room without asking. She was older, her hands marked by years of pain and stubborn survival. She didn't look at my chair. She looked at my face. "They don't leave because you're broken," she said calmly. "They leave because your pain reminds them of their own." I hated how much sense that made. Nights were the worst. Darkness gave my thoughts permission to roam freely. I imagined William lying awake somewhere, convincing himself he had done the right thing. I imagined my family telling the story again and again, each version softer, cleaner, easier to live with. In every version, I was the villain who deserved her fate. I stopped crying at some point, not because it hurt less, but because tears no longer changed anything. Grief settled into me like a permanent resident, rearranging my thoughts, my expectations, my definition of love. Then something small happened. So small no one celebrated it. My foot twitched during therapy. Just once. The therapist froze, pretending it meant nothing, but I saw the flicker in her eyes. Hope is dangerous when you've learned how fragile it is, yet it found me anyway. I didn't tell anyone, not even myself. I protected that moment like a secret too precious to share. Progress came slowly, quietly, almost apologetically. A movement here, a sensation there. Enough to keep me breathing. Not enough to promise miracles. Months passed. Seasons changed outside a window I barely noticed. And somewhere along the way, I realized I no longer wanted them to come back. The thought of their faces filled me with exhaustion instead of longing. I wasn't healing for reconciliation. I was healing for release. One evening, as rain traced lines down the glass, I understood something that frightened me more than anger ever had. I didn't need them to regret what they'd done. I needed to become someone they would no longer recognize. Not out of revenge, out of survival. I began to work harder, not because I believed in a full recovery, but because effort gave my days meaning. Pain became familiar. Failure became routine. And still, I continued. Each small victory felt like reclaiming a piece of myself they thought was gone forever. I imagined William seeing me again someday. Not standing, not yet, but alive in a way he hadn't expected. I imagined his confusion, his guilt, his silence, and for the first time, the image didn't hurt. It empowered me. They thought leaving me had ended my story. They were wrong. It had only stripped it down to its most honest beginning. The first time I stood again, no one was watching. There was no applause, no tears, no triumphant music swelling in the background like it does in movies. It was just me, gripping the metal bar in the therapy room, my hands shaking so badly I thought my bones might give up before my legs did. I didn't stand for long, barely a few seconds. But those seconds changed everything. I felt it in my spine first, like a quiet awakening, then in my thighs, burning and screaming, reminding me that pain was still proof of life. When I collapsed back into the chair, I laughed, a sound so unfamiliar it startled me. Not because it was funny, because it was possible. I didn't tell my family. I didn't tell William. I didn't tell anyone who had once looked at my broken body and decided it was no longer their responsibility. This was mine, just mine. Recovery reshaped my mind as much as my body. I learned discipline the hard way. I learned patience through humiliation. I learned that strength isn't loud. It's repetitive, relentless, and lonely. Every step I practiced in that room felt like a conversation with the past version of myself, the one who had believed love would protect her from cruelty. It wouldn't. But it also wouldn't be the thing that destroyed her. I started working again, remotely at first, small projects, quiet victories no one noticed. Independence tasted better than any apology. With each paycheck, with each completed task, I built a life that didn't require permission or understanding. William reached out months later, a message, just a few words. I heard you were doing better. No question, no apology, just curiosity wrapped in guilt. I stared at the screen for a long time. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I realized I had outgrown the need to explain myself to someone who had already chosen absence. I didn't reply. Instead, I focused on walking again, on balancing, on falling and getting back up without an audience. Progress was slow, but undeniable. Each step was a quiet rebellion against the version of me they had buried. Memories returned in fragments. William's laughter in the kitchen, promises whispered in the dark, plans that assumed permanence. I let them pass through me like ghosts instead of anchors. Nostalgia lost its power when I stopped mistaking it for love. One afternoon, I walked outside alone for the first time. The ground felt different when you haven't trusted it in years. Every uneven surface was a threat. Every step demanded attention. But when the sun touched my face, I closed my eyes and allowed myself a moment of pride. I had survived more than a broken body. I had survived being discarded. As I rebuilt myself, I heard things, stories, whispers about how my family spoke of me now, how my absence had created a silence they didn't know how to fill. Apparently, my disappearance had been inconvenient, uncomfortable. They didn't like being reminded of me. That thought used to hurt. Now it only confirmed what I already knew. I wasn't healing to be welcomed back. I was healing so that if I ever returned, it would be on my terms. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet certainty began to grow. They would see me again. I returned to the city without announcing myself. No messages, no warnings. I rented a small apartment on a street I used to avoid, close enough to recognize the skyline, far enough to remain invisible. Walking through familiar places felt like stepping into someone else's memories. The city remembered me better than the people who lived in it. I moved differently now. Slower than before, yes, but with intention. Each step carried awareness. I had learned my limits and respected them, which somehow made me stronger than I had ever been when I believed myself untouchable. The first time I passed my family's house, my hands tightened around my bag. The windows looked the same. The garden was still poorly maintained. It amazed me how untouched everything was, as if time had decided to punish only me. I didn't stop. I didn't look too long. I wasn't ready to face them yet. William was harder to avoid. I saw him by accident, standing outside a cafe we used to love. He was thinner, older. The way he checked his phone every few seconds told me everything I needed to know. He was waiting for something that never arrived. For a moment, I considered turning away, disappearing again. But something inside me refused to shrink. I walked past him. He didn't recognize me at first, not until I was almost gone. Then I heard my name, uncertain, fragile, spoken like a question that already feared its own answer. Camille? I turned slowly. His face changed in stages. Confusion, disbelief, something close to regret. His eyes went to my legs, then back to my face. The silence between us stretched, heavy with everything we had never resolved. "You're walking," he said. I nodded. I didn't smile. "I heard you were better," he continued, as if that justified his presence. "I didn't know it was this." Neither did I wanted to say. But I didn't owe him my story. "I have a meeting," I said calmly. The lie came easily. So did the goodbye. He asked if we could talk sometime. I told him maybe. It wasn't cruelty. It was honesty. I didn't know yet if there was anything left to say. That night, I sat alone in my apartment and felt something loosen inside my chest. Seeing him hadn't broken me. It hadn't even shaken me. The power he once had over my emotions was gone, and the realization felt strangely like grief. Word travels fast in small emotional ecosystems. Within days, my family knew I was back. Messages arrived, cautious and polite, as if they were speaking to a stranger whose forgiveness they hoped to earn without asking for it. "We heard you're doing well. We'd love to see you. We miss you." They missed the version of me they could ignore. I agreed to dinner. Not because I wanted reconciliation, but because closure deserves witnesses. Sitting at that table again felt surreal. Familiar faces wearing unfamiliar expressions. They asked questions without listening to the answers. They spoke carefully, stepping around the past like it was broken glass. No one apologized, not directly, and that was when I understood something important. They weren't waiting for forgiveness. They were waiting for permission to move on without guilt. I didn't give it to them. I left early, politely, calmly. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't tremble. Strength doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just stands up and walks away. As I closed the door behind me, I realized the most unexpected truth of all. Returning wasn't the victory. Letting go was. William asked to see me again a week later. This time it wasn't accidental. His message was longer, carefully written, rewritten, probably deleted and typed again more times than he would ever admit. He said he wanted to explain. He said he owed me the truth. He said he had never stopped loving me. I read it once, then again. Then I put my phone face down and went for a walk. Love is a strange thing when it arrives too late. It doesn't feel like warmth. It feels like pressure. Like an obligation to feel something you've already outgrown. I remembered the nights I had waited for him to defend me, the mornings I had woken up hoping for his voice, the silence that answered instead. Those memories didn't hurt anymore. They simply existed. I agreed to meet him. We chose a quiet place, neutral ground, somewhere without shared history. When I arrived, he stood up too quickly, knocking his chair back. The nervousness was almost painful to watch. For a moment, I saw the man I had once loved. Not as he was, but as he remembered himself being. "You look different," he said. "So do you." We sat. He talked first. About fear, about pressure, about how my family's certainty had made his doubt feel justified. He said he had believed stepping away was temporary, that I would recover, that things would settle. He said many things that explained everything and fixed nothing. I listened without interrupting, not because I agreed, but because I no longer needed to fight for my version of the truth. It had already survived without witnesses. When he finished, he looked at me like someone waiting for absolution. "I loved you," he said quietly. "I just didn't know how to stay." That was the moment it became clear. Love that leaves when it's inconvenient isn't love. It's comfort wearing a convincing disguise. I know, I replied, and I meant it. But love shouldn't disappear when someone falls. He nodded, tears gathering, finally understanding something too late to change its outcome. He reached for my hand, then hesitated, unsure if he was allowed. I let him take it, not out of longing, but out of kindness. Forgiveness doesn't always mean return. We said goodbye without promises. No dramatic closure, no rekindled hope. Just two people acknowledging that what they had once been could not survive what had happened. Walking home, I felt lighter. Not because I had resolved everything, but because I had stopped carrying questions that were never mine to answer. That night, I dreamed of the girl I used to be. She was standing, unafraid, smiling without knowing why. I woke up with tears on my face and gratitude in my chest. Healing doesn't erase the past. It changes how much power it has over you. My family tried again after that. Invitations, apologies that never quite took responsibility. I kept my distance. Boundaries are a form of self-respect you learn after losing everything else. People began to see me differently. Not as a tragedy, not as a miracle. Just as a woman who had been broken and refused to disappear. There is strength in being visible on your own terms. And still there were moments, quiet, unexpected, when sadness returned. Not for what I lost, but for what never got the chance to exist. I learned to let those moments pass without judgment, because surviving had taught me something I would never forget. You don't return stronger by becoming harder. You return stronger by choosing yourself, even when no one else does. There was a morning, months later, when I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about William in days. The realization startled me more than the pain ever had. For so long, my healing had been measured against absence. His absence, my family's absence, the absence of the life I believed I was supposed to have. That morning, absence no longer defined me. I filled my days with things that didn't ask who I used to be. Work that challenged me. Long walks that reminded my body it could be trusted again. Conversations that didn't orbit around pity or admiration. I was no longer a story people whispered about. I was just a woman moving forward, sometimes slowly, always deliberately. There were setbacks. Days when my legs burned with exhaustion, when stares felt like insults, when mirrors reflected a strength I didn't feel. On those days, I let myself rest without guilt. Rest is not surrender. I had learned that the hard way. I ran into people from my past occasionally. Old friends who didn't know where to place their eyes. Strangers who recognized my name, but not my life. Each interaction tested me, and each time I survived it, I felt less defined by what had happened and more defined by how I responded. One evening, I returned to the place where everything had broken. The pavement looked smaller than I remembered, less dramatic. Pain has a way of enlarging spaces in memory. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the night air, letting my body remember without reliving. I didn't cry. I didn't forgive them out loud. I simply acknowledged the girl who had fallen there and thanked her for not giving up, even when she had every reason to. Strength, I learned, is not about proving anyone wrong. It's about refusing to let the worst moment of your life become the only chapter people read. I had rewritten myself quietly, line by line, without needing applause. When I finally turned to leave, my legs ached, my heart felt steady, and my future no longer scared me. I wasn't walking away from pain. I was walking toward something undefined. And for the first time, that uncertainty felt like freedom. I returned home and sat by the window as the city settled into sleep. Lights flickered on and off. Lives continued without noticing mine, and that anonymity felt like a gift. I had been seen enough in my suffering. Now I wanted to be unseen in my peace. If they ever spoke of me again, they would probably say I survived, that I recovered, that I moved on. They would never know the truth. I didn't return stronger because my body healed. I returned stronger because when everything was taken from me, love, trust, certainty, I chose not to disappear. And that choice became the quiet foundation of everything that followed. The invitation arrived on a morning that felt almost ordinary. A simple envelope. My name written carefully, as if the person feared spelling it wrong would undo their courage. Inside, a message from my mother, brief and restrained, asking if I would come to a family gathering. No apology, no explanation, just an assumption that time had done its work. I stared at the paper longer than necessary. There was no anger in me anymore, only a quiet curiosity. Not about them, about myself. I wanted to know who I would be if I walked back into that house one last time. I went. The living room smelled exactly the same. Old furniture, familiar silence. They stood when I entered, every movement slightly delayed, like they were afraid of making the wrong choice. Their eyes went, inevitably, to my legs, then to my face. They smiled too quickly. Conversation stayed on safe ground. Weather, neighbors, things that didn't matter. They spoke as if nothing irreversible had happened, as if omission could replace accountability. I listened, calm, observant, detached in a way that surprised even me. At some point, my mother reached for my arm. Her hand trembled. "We're proud of you," she said. The words landed softly and meant nothing. "I didn't do this for you," I replied gently, not with bitterness, with clarity. Silence followed. Not the uncomfortable kind, the honest kind. In that pause, I realized I no longer needed them to understand. I needed them to hear me. "I lost everything once," I continued, "and I rebuilt myself without anyone's permission. That's not something you get to celebrate unless you also acknowledge why it had to happen." No one argued. No one defended themselves. They simply sat with the truth they had avoided for years. I stood up before the moment could dissolve into excuses. "I wish you peace," I said. And for the first time, I meant it without sacrificing my own. Outside, the air felt lighter. I walked away without looking back, not because I was afraid, but because I had finally learned where my story no longer needed witnesses. That night, I thought about the versions of love I had known, the conditional kind, the fearful kind, the kind that disappears when tested. And I understood something quietly profound. The strongest love I would ever experience was the one I learned to give myself when no one else stayed. I lay down to sleep with no unanswered questions, no unfinished conversations weighing on my chest. Closure doesn't always come from others. Sometimes it's a decision you make alone. And as sleep found me, I felt something rare and precious settle into my bones. Peace. There is a version of this story that ends with forgiveness, with reunions, with people learning from their mistakes in neat, satisfying ways. This is not that version. This one ends with something quieter, something harder to notice, but far more real. I did not become stronger because my legs learned how to carry me again. I became stronger because I stopped waiting for anyone to carry me through the parts of life that hurt the most. I stopped measuring my worth by who stayed and who left. I stopped confusing endurance with love. Years have passed now. I walk without thinking about it most days. Sometimes I still feel the echo of pain, a reminder etched into muscle and memory, but it no longer frightens me. It reminds me of who I was and how far I traveled to become who I am. I hear things occasionally, that my family speaks of me with careful respect, that William never quite settled, always searching for something unnamed. Those details arrive like distant weather reports. Interesting, irrelevant, easily forgotten. My life is not extraordinary, and that is its greatest victory. I wake up, I work, I love in ways that do not require me to shrink. I trust slowly, intentionally, without apology. I choose people who choose me back. If there is a lesson hidden in everything I lived through, it is this. Survival is not about proving resilience to those who doubted you. It is about creating a life so full that their absence becomes unimportant. I was once left broken on cold ground, convinced my story had ended there. It took years to understand that moment was not an ending. It was an invitation. Not to revenge, not to bitterness, but to ownership. They left me crippled. I returned stronger than ever. Not because I stood again, but because I refused to disappear.